The morning I realized my best friend was trying to erase me, I was standing in my own closet. Not because I had walked in on something dramatic. I was standing in my own closet in the morning, reaching for my gray blazer, and it was not there. In its place were maternity dresses in my size. Sarah had moved in 3 months pregnant and was not yet large enough to wear them. She had arranged them by color. They were beautiful. They smelled like her perfume. And they were hanging in the exact spot where my gray blazer had lived for 4 years. I stood there for a long time. That moment, quiet, unheroic, just a woman in her own closet surrounded by someone else's clothes, was the moment I finally understood what was happening to me. I have to go back to the beginning or none of this will make sense. And I need it to make sense. Not for you. For me. My name is Maya. I built my company from a series of failed prototypes and a warehouse lease I could not really afford. That was 9 years before any of this happened. By the time Sarah moved in, Hargrove Green Solutions employed 400 people and had recently closed a public offering that put my face on the cover of a business magazine I had read in waiting rooms my whole childhood. I had arrived at every version of success I had imagined, and the only thing missing was so small and so enormous at the same time that I had stopped being able to name it without my voice doing something embarrassing. I could not carry a child. My husband Ethan said what husbands say. That we had options, that biology was not the only path to a family. That he loved me and we would find another way. He meant all of it. I believed him. But there is a grief to infertility that is almost impossible to explain to someone who has not been inside it, not because it is worse than other kinds of grief, but because it is invisible. No one sends flowers. There is no funeral. The world keeps moving and you are expected to move with it, and the loss just sits inside you like furniture no one else can see, and you keep walking into it in the dark. Sarah had been my closest friend for 11 years. We had met in the first week of university, assigned to adjacent rooms in the same corridor, and had immediately recognized in each other something complementary. I was relentless and she was warm, and we each had the quality the other sometimes lacked. She was an artist, genuinely talented, the kind of painter whose work made people stop and stay stopped. But the art market is designed to reward everything except talent. And by the time I was running a company, Sarah was cycling through studio sublets and funding her work with waitressing income and loans that had begun to accumulate in ways she did not fully discuss. I helped her. Of course I helped her. That is what you do for someone you love. Rent covered in bad months. A proper studio space arranged for her birthday. Medical bills absorbed without discussion. I did not keep a ledger. I want to be clear about that. I was not building a debt to call in later. I was taking care of someone I loved because I could, and because it cost me very little and meant a great deal to her, and because I had watched her talent fight against the world's indifference for a decade, and I refused to let money be the thing that finally broke it. When the IVF failed for the 3rd time, it was Sarah who sat on my bathroom floor with me. Not in the hallway. Not on the edge of the tub. On the floor, her back against the cabinet, her hand over mine, not saying anything, just being there in the way she had always known how to be there. That is who she was to me. That is who I thought she was. I asked her 3 weeks later. We were in her studio and she was mixing colors and I was sitting on a stool watching her work, and I heard myself say it before I had consciously decided to, "Be my surrogate," I said. I held my breath after. I had been turning it over for weeks. But saying it out loud to her felt like handing someone the most fragile thing you owned and watching their face to see how they held it. She set down her brush. She turned around. And then she cried, the immediate, unguarded kind, not performed, and said yes before she had finished wiping her face. She said she would be honored. She said she wanted to do this for me. She said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, and I believed her, and I still believe I have to keep believing that in that moment she meant it. She moved in at 9 weeks. Her studio apartment was close to a bus line and far from the specialist, and the practical arguments for her living with us were genuinely practical. She had her own suite on the east wing with a separate entrance. The surrogacy agreement had been prepared by a reproductive attorney and reviewed by both our lawyers. Everything was documented, witnessed, and formal. I had treated it the way I treated everything I cared about, with complete thoroughness. The first month was almost exactly what I had imagined. We went to prenatal appointments together. We sat on the sofa in the evenings and looked at names and argued happily about whether the nursery should be yellow or green. Ethan was careful and kind in the way he had always been careful and kind, making sure Sarah felt welcome without making me feel displaced. We were 3 people building something together, and the thing we were building was a family I had stopped believing I could have. I don't know precisely when it shifted. That is the thing about gradual replacement. It has no single origin point you can point to. It happens in accumulations the way water damage works. By the time you see the stain, the structure has already been compromised. The first sign was so small I filed it under thoughtfulness. Sarah had rearranged the living room slightly while I was at a conference. She said the sofa's original position was in the afternoon glare, and it wasn't good for the baby's developing eyes. I noted, somewhere under the surface of my thinking, that the baby's eyes were not yet open and the sofa was in my living room. But Sarah had always had opinions about spaces. She was an artist and it was part of how she moved through the world, so I thanked her and moved on. The second sign I filed under pregnancy hormones. Sarah had started spending her evenings with Ethan in the media room, watching films while I worked late. When I came home one night at 10 and found them asleep on the same sofa, her feet tucked under a blanket he had apparently brought from the linen cupboard, I felt something that I immediately put away. This was my best friend pregnant with my child and my husband who was a good man. I was not going to become the kind of woman who was threatened by a blanket. The third sign I could not file anywhere. I had been at a board meeting that ran until 9. I came home to find a dinner party in progress, 12 people, caterers in my dining room. Sarah was at the head of my table. She was wearing my green dress, the one I had bought in Milan and had never worn because I was saving it for something that felt important enough. It had been let out at the waist to accommodate her pregnancy. She had clearly had it altered without asking me. She was laughing at something one of Ethan's colleagues had said, and the room was warm with candlelight and conversation, and for one disorienting moment, I stood in my own doorway and felt like a guest who had arrived at the wrong time. Ethan saw me and stood up. He looked genuinely confused about why I looked the way I looked. Sarah smiled. She said my assistant had told her I wasn't coming, so they hadn't set a place for me, but of course there was plenty of food. She said this warmly. She said it with complete innocence. And she said it in front of 12 people, which meant I had to decide in real time whether to address it or absorb it, and I absorbed it, and I have thought about that absorption many times since. I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed in my work clothes, listening to the laughter downstairs and trying to construct a version of events in which what was happening was something other than what it appeared to be. I am very good at constructing alternative explanations. It is one of the skills that make me a good CEO. The refusal to catastrophize. The instinct to find the most generous interpretation of available information. I could not find one this time. Over the following weeks I started paying closer attention. And what I found, beneath the warmth and the pregnancy glow and the constant gentle invocations of the baby's well-being, was a pattern so precise it almost had to be intentional. Sarah had called my gynecologist twice while I was traveling, identifying herself as a concerned friend and suggesting that my stress levels had escalated to a point where I might be self-medicating. She had spoken to 3 members of my household staff about concerns regarding my erratic behavior, a word I have never once in my life had applied to me. She had told Ethan on at least 2 occasions I could document, that I had said something I did not say, that I was thinking about moving us to a smaller place after the baby came, that I had mentioned feeling detached from the pregnancy, that I had been crying in my office and didn't want him to know. None of it was true. Every piece of it was a lie. I need you to understand what this kind of thing does to a person. It is not like a confrontation which you can answer. It is not like an accusation which you can refute. It is fog. It makes the people around you begin to watch you the way you watch something fragile, and their watching changes how you move, and then you start to appear like someone who is not quite themselves. And the fog thickens and the watching intensifies, and suddenly you are a woman in her own life who cannot make a single move without it being interpreted through the story someone else has been quietly building about her. There was a Tuesday that I want to describe to you because it was the moment I came closest to losing myself entirely. I had been in a series of back-to-back calls from 7 in the morning. At noon my assistant told me that Ethan had called twice and seemed worried. I called him back. He said carefully, the way he spoke when he was choosing words. Sarah had told him that I had gone through her room that morning while she was at her prenatal appointment. That I had read her journal. That I had moved her things. I had been on call since 7. I had not left my office. I had 20 time-stamped recordings and 6 people who could confirm my location for the entire morning. And yet I found myself in the 15 seconds before I thought to say any of that actually trying to remember. Actually reaching back through the morning to check. Because that is what a sustained, patient campaign of manufactured doubt does. It makes you question the one thing that cannot be faked, which is your own experience of your own life. I caught myself doing it and I felt something cold move through me because I understood that this was not confusion. This was the intended effect. This was the point. I am a CEO. I run a company that depends on my credibility. I have board members and investors and 400 employees whose livelihoods are tethered to my competence and my reputation. And I was watching that reputation being disassembled from the inside, piece by careful piece, by a woman who knew every room in my house and every weakness in my history and every person I trusted. What made it so effective, what I have had to spend an amount of time with a therapist to fully understand, was that Sarah had not invented a version of me that was unrecognizable. She had taken real things. My intensity, my long hours, my tendency to process emotionally difficult situations by working instead of feeling them, the genuine grief of infertility that I had never fully allowed myself to be seen inside of. She had taken all of that and simply reframed it. Not lied outright. Reframed. Stressed became unhinged. Focused became obsessive. Grieving became unstable. The portrait she painted of me to the people around me was made entirely of my own features, just rearranged until I looked like something dangerous. That is a kind of cruelty. The kind that leaves no fingerprints because everything it uses was already yours. The month before the baby was due, Sarah faked a fall. I was not there when it happened. I was 20 minutes away, in a meeting I can document with timestamps and witnesses, when the hospital called to tell me that my surrogate had been admitted following a fall on the staircase and that she had given a statement to the attending nurse indicating that she had been pushed. I drove to the hospital. I walked into the room. Sarah was propped against pillows with an expression I had seen before, the unguarded, immediate expression she had worn when she cried in her studio and said, "Yes, I'll do this for you." Except this time the tears were pointed in a different direction. She told the nurse she was frightened of me. She said I had become fixated on the baby and volatile in my behavior. She said she didn't want to press charges. She said this magnanimously, generously, as though she were protecting me, but that she was afraid to be alone with me. The nurse asked me to wait in the corridor. I stood in a hospital corridor, outside the room where my unborn daughter and the woman I had trusted more than almost anyone in my life were on the other side of a door, and I thought about the sequence of events that had led to this specific moment. The studio. The bathroom floor. The contract signed in good faith. The green dress altered without asking. The calls to my doctor. The dinner party. The closet full of someone else's clothes. Each individual piece had been dismissible. Each individual piece had had a reasonable explanation I had been willing to extend. But standing in that corridor I saw them assembled into a shape for the first time, and the shape was unmistakable. I went home that night and I did what I do when a situation has exceeded my emotional capacity. I worked. Not on the company. I pulled every log, every camera feed, every call record, every transfer authorization I had signed or not signed in the past 5 months. I am a technology CEO. My house is smart in the way that expensive houses are smart, and I had never particularly thought about what that meant until I needed it to mean something. I had cameras I had installed for security that covered the nursery, the kitchen, the main entrance, and the upper landing. I had not been watching them because I had not thought I needed to. I watched them now. Over the following 72 hours, I compiled a file that was thorough enough to make my attorney go quiet for a full minute before she spoke. Footage of Sarah on the phone in the nursery with a glass of red wine, 3 separate evenings. Footage of her at my desk, signing documents in a hand that was approximating mine with practiced ease. The balcony recording was the one that ended it. A phone call she made at 11 at night while apparently believing the outdoor cameras were disabled for maintenance. They were not. She told her lawyer that once the baby arrived, the plan was a restraining order on the grounds of documented instability, a custody filing on the basis of the surrogate contract's ambiguous language around primary caregiver, and a civil suit for emotional damages that would, if she prevailed, require the liquidation of assets sufficient to destabilize my company. She was not doing this for Ethan. She was not in love with my husband, which was the part of the original story I had told myself that was wrong, and I had to sit with how wrong it was for a long time afterward. Ethan was a mechanism. The house was a destination. The baby was leverage. What Sarah wanted was not my marriage. She wanted the version of life she had watched me build for 11 years while she painted in a cramped studio and waited for the world to notice her talent. The baby arrived on a Thursday morning. I was in the room. I had been in the room for 11 hours by the time it was over, and when they placed my daughter in my arms for the first time, small and furious and perfect in the way that newborns are perfect, like something that has never been touched by the world's capacity for compromise, I felt something so large and so specific that I cannot describe it except to say that every loss that had preceded her made sense in that moment. Not that it was worth it exactly, but that it had led here. Sarah reached for her from the bed. She said, "Give her to me, she needs her mother." She said it with complete conviction, which was the most frightening version of Sarah, not the calculated one, but the one who had convinced herself. I said, "You're right. She does." And then the door opened. The charges were filed over the following weeks. Fraud for the forged signatures. Financial misconduct for unauthorized transfers. Child endangerment, due to the documented alcohol consumption during pregnancy. The restraining order she had planned to file against me was filed instead against her, and it held. I have not spoken to her since. Ethan and I went to couples counseling for 6 months. Not because he had done something wrong exactly, he had been manipulated with the specific precision of someone who had studied his trust for over a decade and knew exactly which doors it left unlocked. But a marriage that has been used as a battlefield requires reconstruction, even when neither person is the enemy, and we were honest enough with each other to do the work instead of pretending it wasn't needed. I want to say something about the friendship because I think it matters, and I think people tend to skip over it in favor of the more satisfying story of simple betrayal. The truth is messier than that. Sarah and I had 11 real years before any of this happened. The bathroom floor was real. The studio was real. The afternoons we spent when we were 23 arguing about whether it was possible to be both commercially successful and artistically uncompromised, those were real and they mattered, and I was shaped by them in ways I carry to this day. I am not able to reduce 11 years to an origin story for a scheme. I think the harder truth is that both things were true simultaneously. That she genuinely loved me, and that something in our friendship eventually became unbearable to her in a way she could not find an honest path through. I am not saying this to excuse it. I am saying it because I think the version where people are simply villains or simply victims is almost never the true version, and the true version is the only one worth telling. People ask me if I regret trusting Sarah. I have thought about this question longer than any question I have been asked in my professional life, and I think the honest answer is this. I don't regret trusting her in her studio on the floor of my bathroom in the years before any of this happened. That trust was real, built on something real, and the fact that she found a way to weaponize it does not make it a mistake I made. It makes it something she chose to do with something I gave her freely. I do regret not listening to the closet. Not the gray blazer specifically, but the feeling I had standing there in the quiet of my own house in the morning, surrounded by someone else's clothes. Something in my body already knowing the thing my mind was not yet ready to say. I have learned since then to listen to that feeling. To take it seriously when my own space begins to feel like a place I need permission to occupy. To understand that the people most capable of doing us damage are rarely strangers. They are the ones who know exactly where we keep the gray blazer. Here is the question I want to leave you with. Not about Sarah. Not about betrayal or ambition, or the specific darkness that can grow inside an old friendship. About you. Think about the people inside your life right now. The ones with access to your home, your vulnerability, your version of the gray blazer. Think about whether your generosity has ever been received as power. Think about whether anyone in your circle has ever benefited from your difficulty. And then ask yourself this. When someone helps you carry your dream, are they carrying it with you, or are they learning its weight so they know exactly how to drop it? If you were in Maya's shoes and you knew the price of your dream was losing your identity, would you still pay it? Would you trust a friend with your greatest vulnerability? Don't answer too quickly. Let it sit. Some questions are only useful if you're willing to stay uncomfortable with them. If this story stayed with you, if something in it recognized something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We drop a new cinematic story every week. And comment below, what was your closet moment? The moment you knew before you were ready to know? I read every single one.